The Imperium of Man is the largest human civilization in history, and its entire existence depends on a corpse sitting in a chair. That's not a metaphor. Across over 1 million worlds, trillions of humans live and die in service to a guy who hasn't blinked in 10,000 years. So today, I'm breaking down every major planet in Warhammer 40,000 and what makes each one horrifying, fascinating, or both. Starting with the big one, Terra. Terra is Earth, your Earth, the one you're sitting on right now. Except in the 41st millennium, it's been so completely destroyed and rebuilt that you wouldn't recognize a single square inch of it. The oceans are gone. The atmosphere is artificially maintained, and hundreds of billions of people are crammed onto its surface. But none of that matters compared to what's sitting in the Himalayas. The Imperial Palace covers a massive stretch of what used to be the Himalayan mountain range, and at its heart is the Golden Throne. On that throne sits the Emperor of Mankind, trapped between life and death for over 10,000 years. He's kept technically alive by feeding him roughly 1,000 psychers every single day. Their souls fuel the Astronomicon, the psychic lighthouse that lets Imperial navigators guide ships through the warp. No Astronomicon, no space travel. No space travel, no Imperium. 1,000 people die daily so the lights stay on, which is, not ideal. The Emperor ended up there because of the Horus Heresy, where his most trusted son turned traitor and launched a full assault on Terra. The Emperor won, but took mortal wounds doing it, and he's been entombed on that chair ever since. Here's the thing, is the Emperor actually conscious, or is he just a withered husk sustained by technology nobody fully understands anymore? Terra's entire existence revolves around keeping one barely alive god figure going. The capital of humanity is a tomb, and somehow it only gets worse from here. Mars is the Imperium's most important ally and also its most dangerous one, because Mars isn't really part of the Imperium, not in the way that matters. The Adeptus Mechanicus operates as an independent techno-religious state that worships the machine god, the Omnissiah, and they just happen to share a solar system with humanity's capital. The alliance works because both sides need each other. Terra needs weapons and technology. Mars needs resources and protection. It's a marriage of convenience held together by 10,000 years of mutual distrust and a treaty older than the Imperium itself. And the scale of what Mars produces is genuinely absurd. Thousands of forge complexes running constantly, churning out a staggering portion of the Imperium's total military hardware. The planet's surface is entirely covered in manufactorums and forge cities, with billions of workers and servitors maintaining production around the clock. The atmosphere itself was reshaped long ago. The original terraforming efforts from the age of technology twisted into something industrial and toxic. Mars doesn't sleep, Mars doesn't stop. But here's where it gets complicated. Deep beneath the surface, there are sealed vaults containing technology dating back to the dark age of technology, over 15,000 years before the current era. Nobody knows exactly what's in all of them. The Mechanicus knows more than they let on. They just won't tell anyone. The Fabricator General sits on the Council of the High Lords of Terra, technically an equal among them, and the Mechanicus hoards knowledge like a dragon hoards gold. They obsessively hunt for standard template construct fragments across the galaxy, technology from humanity's golden age, and they keep whatever they find classified from the very civilization they're supposed to serve. So the obvious question is, why? What are they hiding? And what happens when Terra finally decides to ask, but Mars at least pretends to cooperate? The next planet on our list didn't get that luxury. Cadia held the line for 10,000 years. Let that sink in. 10,000 years of standing between the Imperium and the literal mouth of hell, and it worked. Every single day for 10 millennia, millions of soldiers woke up, put on their gear, and stared directly into the Eye of Terror like it was a 9 to 5, which for them, it basically was. The planet sat right at the Cadian Gate, the most stable route out of the Eye of Terror into real space. That made it the single most important choke point in the entire galaxy. Cadia's crust was laced with strange pylons of ancient Nacron origin, built long before humanity even existed, with massive military infrastructure covering the surface. We're talking millions of soldiers trained from birth. The entire planet was essentially a factory that produced war. But here's where it gets dark. In 999 M41, Abaddon the Despoiler launched the 13th Black Crusade and hurled everything he had at Cadia. The planet that had never fallen in 10,000 years finally cracked. Literally. Abaddon drove the wreck of the Blackstone Fortress Will of Eternity straight into the planet's surface. When Cadia broke, it didn't just lose a war. It broke the galaxy. The destruction of those pylons allowed the Eye of Terror to expand, tearing open the Cicatrix Maledictum, a massive warp rift that split the entire Imperium in half. Thousands of worlds became unreachable overnight. The community was genuinely split on this one. Veterans felt like the rug got pulled out from under the setting's foundation. Newer fans saw it as the moment 40k's story actually started moving forward. Both sides have a point, honestly. But whether you loved it or hated it, Cadia's fall proved one thing. nothing in 40,000 is safe. And if the galaxy's greatest fortress world can be erased, wait until you hear what happened to the planet that tried to outsmart the Imperium entirely. Macragge. The Ultramarines are the poster boys of Warhammer 40,000. They're on the box art, they're in every trailer, and they're the chapter Games Workshop will never stop talking about, which means a lot of people have already decided Macragge was boring. Here's the thing though, the Ultramarines might be squatting on a world with secrets buried deep beneath its surface, and nobody seems to care. The Fortress of Hera is a massive complex built into the mountains, serving as the Ultramarines' fortress monastery and seat of power for the entire realm of Ultramar. But the really interesting part is what lies beneath it. Deep under the fortress are ancient structures and vaults that predate the Ultramarines entirely. The leading theory is that Guilliman didn't start from scratch. He built on top of something already there, which is, very on brand for the Imperium. Nobody talks about what's actually buried underneath. The Ultramarines just built on top of it and started painting everything blue. But Macragge isn't all mysterious foundations. In 745 M41, Tyranid Hive fleet behemoth slammed into the planet and the Ultramarines paid for their homeworld in blood. The entire First Company was wiped out defending the polar fortresses. That's the chapter's most elite veterans, gone in a single engagement. The battle for Macragge became the Imperium's first major victory against a Hive fleet, and it cost them almost everything. Macragge also serves as the capital of Ultramar, a mini-empire of around 500 worlds that Guilliman organized into something resembling functional governance. So they're not just soldiers, they're running a civilization. Cool, love them or hate them, a chapter sitting on ancient foundations they refuse to question while governing an entire sub-empire is genuinely one of the weirder details in the setting. And speaking of chapters with secrets baked into their homeworld, the next planet makes Macragge look like a vacation resort, or Armageddon. Armageddon is home to billions of people, produces some of the finest soldiers the Imperium has ever seen, and has been on fire for basically the last 3 centuries, which is, not ideal. The planet is a critical military hub for the entire Segmentum Solar. Massive hive cities, endless industrial output, billions of workers feeding the Imperial war machine. On paper, it should be one of the most heavily defended worlds in the galaxy. In practice, it's an orc buffet. The second war for Armageddon kicked off when Warboss Getskal Mag Auruk Thraka decided this was his favorite planet. Not strategically, not tactically. He just liked it here. He invaded with a massive WAG in 941 M41, killing millions of civilians and devastating entire hive cities in the process. The Imperium eventually pushed him back, largely thanks to Commissar Yarrick's stubbornness, declared victory, and then did absolutely nothing to prepare for the obvious sequel. So Getskal came back, because of course he did. The third war for Armageddon saw him return with an even bigger WAG, millions upon millions of orcs, and this time the fighting consumed the entire planet. Entire populations gone. The ash wastes between the remaining cities are now a permanent hellscape of rusted tank husks, perpetual dust storms, and orc stragglers who never got the memo that the war paused. But here's the real tragedy. The Armageddon Steel Legion is considered one of the Imperium's absolute elite guard regiments. Best trained, best equipped, hardest fighters. And where are they? Literally everywhere except Armageddon. The Imperium ships them across the galaxy to fight other people's wars while their own homeworld gets invaded on a seemingly scheduled basis. Some fans theorize the High Lords consider the planet strategically expendable, a meat grinder that keeps Getskal occupied so he doesn't hit somewhere they actually care about. Armageddon's greatest export is soldiers. Its greatest import is suffering. But at least the orcs are a known enemy. The next planet's threat came from something far less predictable. Fenris. Most Space Marine chapters recruit warriors. The Space Wolves recruit survivors. There's a massive difference because Fenris doesn't produce soldiers. It produces people who have already beaten death before they ever pick up a bolter. Fenris is a death world locked in extreme seasonal cycles. For most of its year, the planet is a frozen hellscape of shifting ice sheets, volcanic upheaval, and seas that swallow entire islands overnight. No hive cities. The human population lives in scattered tribal communities, fighting each other in the wildlife just to exist. Fenrisian wolves, kraken, ice trolls, creatures that treat humans like appetizers. This planet actively hunts weakness. Every recruit is selected from the fiercest tribal warriors, young men who've already proven themselves in combat against rival clans and Fenrisian predators. The wolves watch these battles, pick the most promising candidates, then subject them to trials that kill most of them before implantation even begins, which is, not ideal for recruitment numbers. But here's what makes the Space Wolves genuinely different. They rejected the Codex Astartes. They kept their own structure, great companies instead of standard companies, wolf lords instead of captains. They built their entire identity around Fenrisian warrior traditions dating back to Leman Russ, and they fight with something most Astartes chapters have had beaten out of them. Joy. Not in the psychotic way, in the raise a tankard and sing about it afterward way. And they can back it up. During the Siege of the Fang in M32, a skeleton garrison held their fortress monastery against Magnus the Red and the Thousand Sons, one fortress, against a demon Primarch and his legion of sorcerers. They're considered one of the Imperium's most human chapters, but start digging into the Wolfen and what the Canis Helix really does to their gene seed, and that label gets complicated fast. But that's a rabbit hole for another day, because the next planet on our list makes Fenris look like a tropical vacation. Nocturne produces the rarest resource in the entire Warhammer 40,000 universe. Not adamantium, not archaeotech. Good people. The planet itself is trying to kill everyone on it at all times, which, to be fair, describes most planets in the setting. But Nocturne takes it personally. The world has a wildly eccentric orbit that swings it close to its companion moon, Prometheus, triggering massive tectonic upheaval called the Time of Trial. Earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, tidal shifts. The whole planet basically rearranges itself every few decades. And if you're thinking the periods between cataclysms might be livable, sure. Except magma flows and volcanic activity cover huge stretches of the surface at all times, so your options are earthquake, eruption, or lava. Pick your favorite. Several million people somehow live here, mostly in nomadic settlements called sanctuary cities that relocate between the times of trial. And from that population, the Salamanders chapter recruits every single one of its Space Marines. The initiation process is exactly as insane as the planet demands. Each candidate endures brutal trials on a world that's already trying to kill them daily. Most don't make it through. The rest just become part of the scenery. But here's what makes Nocturne genuinely special. The culture isn't built around war. It's built around craftsmanship and community. These people are artisans, smiths, builders. They forge beautiful things in literal hellfire, and the philosophy bleeds directly into their Space Marines. The Salamanders are confirmed as one of the only chapters in 40k that genuinely, actively prioritizes protecting civilians, not as a strategic calculation, not as propaganda. They actually care. In a universe specifically designed around cruelty, betrayal, and endless war that's almost subversive. Every other chapter treats humanity like ammunition. The Salamanders treat them like people worth saving. Vulcan's sons are walking proof that you can be forged in the worst conditions imaginable and still come out kind, which is beautiful. But kindness doesn't exactly help when a blood-red desert world breeds warriors cursed with an uncontrollable thirst for violence. Baal. The Blood Angels are what happens when you give poets a genetic curse that turns them into animals. And that contradiction is the entire point. Baal itself looks exactly how you'd expect a cursed homeworld to look. Blood-red desert stretching in every direction, radiation-soaked wastelands left over from ancient nuclear wars, and perpetual dust storms choking the atmosphere. It's a tomb with weather, but the Blood Angels who call it home are, against all logic, one of the most refined and artistic chapters in the entire Imperium. They paint, they sculpt, they write poetry. Their fortress monastery contains works of art that would make Renaissance masters weep. They value honor, civilian protection, and the kind of restrained nobility that most Space Marines couldn't spell, let alone practice. Here's where it gets tragic. Every single Blood Angel carries the red thirst, a genetic flaw inherited from their Primarch Sanguinius that creates an overwhelming craving for blood and violence. Lurking beneath that is the Black Rage, a deeper madness where they relive Sanguinius's final moments and lose themselves entirely. One moment you're reciting verse, the next you're tearing someone apart with your bare hands. And their father knew how it would end. Sanguinius possessed precognitive abilities. He saw visions of his own death at the hands of Horus during the Siege of Terra, saw it clearly, and went anyway. That prophecy has hung over the Blood Angels for 10,000 years. Every beautiful thing they create exists under the shadow of a father who walked knowingly into oblivion. The universe made sure they paid for that nobility too. When Hive Fleet Leviathan hit Baal, the Blood Angels held the line against overwhelming odds and were saved from total annihilation only by the arrival of the Indomitus Crusade. Most of the chapter was devastated by the end, which is, not ideal, but that's Baal, a world where beauty and savagery share the same bloodstream. And the bill always comes due. Speaking of bills coming due, the next planet charges interest in blood, sweat, and an almost comical amount of giant insects. Catachan. Most planets in the 40,000 universe are dangerous because of what lives on them. Catachan is dangerous because it is alive. The entire planet is essentially one giant organism that has decided, collectively, that everything should die. And I mean everything. Catachan is classified as a jungle death world, which in a galaxy full of death worlds is like being voted most likely to kill you at a school where everyone is already trying to kill you. Nearly every species on the planet is hostile hostile to human life, from the flora to the fauna. The largest predators, called Katakan devils, are massive centipede-like creatures that can grow over 30 meters long. That's roughly a third of a football field of pure "you're already dead." But here's where it gets genuinely eerie. The jungle canopy is so dense that satellite surveillance is effectively useless. Entire regions remain completely unexplored, swallowed by vegetation so thick that expeditions simply vanish. Nobody knows what's in there. Nobody wants to find out. Some fans theorize the ecosystem isn't natural at all, that something engineered this planet to be a biological weapon. Looking at the evidence, that tracks. The Imperium's solution to Catachan is beautifully grim. They don't defend it. They use it. Children who survive to adulthood on Catachan are already hardened killers before they ever enlist. The Catachan jungle fighters are considered among the most elite light infantry in the Imperial Guard, forged by a planet that genuinely hates them. Here's the kicker though. Catachan has resisted Xenos invasions through sheer environmental hostility. Multiple alien forces have tried to take the planet, and the jungle itself proved deadlier than any garrison. Orcs have invaded Catachan and lost, not to the Imperial Guard, to the trees, which is, not ideal for the orcs' reputation, but if you think a planet that eats its own invaders is unsettling, wait until you see a city that exists outside of reality itself. Kamareg G. This one breaks the rules. Kamarog isn't a planet. It's not even in real space. It's a city built inside the Webway, an ancient transportation network constructed by the Old Ones millions of years before humanity figured out fire. The whole thing exists in a pocket dimension, accessible only through hidden portals scattered across the galaxy. You can't find it on a map because it technically doesn't exist on any map. And here's the thing, the Imperium has always known the Dark Elder exists, but pinning down Kamara itself is basically impossible. The Webway is incomprehensibly vast and shifts in ways that make conventional navigation useless. Imagine knowing that an entire civilization of predators has been raiding your worlds for thousands of years, operating from a hidden dimension, and you can do absolutely nothing about it because you can't even begin to chart where they are. The city houses an almost incomprehensible number of Drukhari, likely billions, maybe more, organized into competing cabals, witch cults, and homunculus covens locked in constant internal power struggles. But the population count is almost irrelevant compared to the sheer age of its inhabitants. Kamarog's denizens stave off the slow death of their souls by feeding on the suffering of others. A Dark Elder Archon could have lived for tens of thousands of years, sustained by an endless diet of torment, while the Imperium outside burned through entire ages. These aren't just raiders, they're the galaxy's oldest predators, operating from a place that doesn't exist, with more accumulated experience than entire civilizations. That stability finally cracked during the disjunction, when Vec's own machinations allowed a massive demonic incursion into Kamara, and later the rise of the Inari destabilized the social order that had held for millennia. Suddenly, the city that nobody could find, nobody could reach, and nobody could threaten had enemies inside its own walls. But if a city between dimensions sounds impossible to deal with, wait until you hear about a species that looked at the entire concept of galactic war and said, "We'll just do it better than everyone." Thanks. TAU. Every galaxy has that one kid who transfers in halfway through the school year and somehow makes honor roll by Friday. That's Tau. While the Imperium has been grinding through 10,000 years of bureaucratic decay, religious mania, and getting punched in the face by every species in existence, the Tau went from pre-industrial civilization to interstellar empire in roughly 6,000 years. Their homeworld is arid, organized, and home to billions of citizens living under the greater good philosophy, which emphasizes cooperation, rational governance, and collective progress, which, in the context of Warhammer 40,000, is deeply suspicious. Tau society runs on a rigid caste system. Earth caste builds things, fire caste fights, air caste flies, water caste negotiates, and the ethereal caste sits at the top, maintaining political and spiritual control over the entire species. How they maintain that control is where things get uncomfortable. There are persistent theories that the ethereals use some form of pheromone-based mind control to keep everyone compliant. The greater good might not be a philosophy so much as a chemical leash. Nobody's confirmed it. Nobody's denied it either. Then there's the Damocles Gulf Crusade. In 742 M41, the Imperium launched a full military campaign to crush the Tau Empire. It stalled out. The Imperium, with its trillion soldier armies and 10,000 years of warfare experience, could not eliminate a species that discovered interstellar travel 5 minutes ago. The crusade was ultimately called off when the Tyranid threat forced the Imperium to redirect resources, and in the centuries following, the Tau expanded their territory significantly through further sphere expansions. Their 15 battlesuits and coordinated fire tactics now rival mid-tier Imperial forces. The community naturally has opinions. Some players think the Tau are too anime for 40k's grimdark tone. Too clean, too hopeful, but that's exactly what makes them unsettling. Nothing optimistic survives in this universe. Either the Toe knows something everyone else doesn't, or they're about to learn a very painful lesson. But speaking of painful lessons, let's talk about a planet that already learned one the hard way, Holy Prospero. Every planet we've covered today has suffered invasion, corruption, extinction level warfare. But Prospero is different. Prospero didn't fall because of Xenos or demons or some unstoppable galactic threat. Prospero was murdered by the Imperium itself. Before the heresy, Prospero was arguably the most beautiful world in the entire galaxy. Crystalline spires that caught light like frozen lightning, libraries containing knowledge that predated the Imperium by millennia, a civilization of psychically gifted people living under the guidance of Magnus the Red, a Primarch who believed knowledge was humanity's greatest weapon, and he wasn't wrong. Then the Emperor gave an order, or maybe he didn't. Here's where it gets complicated because the details of what the Emperor actually told Leman Russ to do are murky at best. The official version says Russ was sent to bring Magnus back to Terra. What Russ actually did was burn Prospero to glass. The Great Library of Tizca, gone. The crystalline spires, ash. An entire world's population reduced to near extinction in a single campaign. The Space Wolves didn't just defeat the Thousand Suns, they erased an entire civilization, and the worst part, Russ was manipulated. Horus twisted the Emperor's orders before they ever reached Russ, convincing him that Magnus was too dangerous to take alive, which means the single most devastating act of cultural destruction in Imperial history was built on a traitor's lie. That truth is the knife that never stops twisting. The Thousand Suns have spent 10,000 years hating the Imperium for what happened, and honestly, you can't blame them. Prospero's surface is now a desolate wasteland of ruins and psychic residue, classified as a dead world. The Thousand Suns eventually relocated to the planet of the Sorcerers, within the Eye of Terror, a chaos-corrupted domain built by exiles mourning everything they once loved. Prospero is the thesis statement of Warhammer 40,000, a galaxy where the greatest enemy was always within, and the line between loyalty and atrocity was never clear. Not all stories have a point. Sometimes they're just sad and devastating from beginning to end. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, click the video on the screen now.